Okay, so I'm turning on the recording now. And this is the regularly scheduled meeting of ITSE 2309 database programming. This is the last class meeting, the last official class meeting. We will meet on Wednesday. I'll be here on Wednesday for the final. And let's see, Wednesday will also be the last day to turn in any assignments. What's that? Wednesday, 1 week from today. And I'm going to, I'll put that out as an announcement. I'm going to make that time at 10 o'clock a.m. This is because I have to have time to grade, calculate my grades, and if I go right up to the last minute, then I don't have time to get my grades turned in, and if I don't get mine turned in, everything turns into a pumpkin. So I'm going to make that at 10 o'clock on 1 week from today. So it's 11 o'clock now. 1 week from today, all turn in except for the final will be closed. I don't think I have anything that I've set after that. Anyway, let's see. And then the question was about future classes. Will I keep the same textbook? And I answered that yes, we would keep the same textbook. People sometimes ask me about the next class. There is a next class that is offered next semester, and I'm not teaching it. I thought I was going to be, but someone else took it. It's called Descriptive Analytics. And it's, let's see if I can find it. Well, I see my my shell has timed out. I don't feel like logging back in and searching for it. It is ITSE 2370 Descriptive Analytics, and it is being taught by Mr. Charles Braun. I believe he is going to have his office over at Spring Creek. I don't know, BRAUN, CBRAUN at collin.edu. But my understanding is that he is going to be teaching the class via distance learning and as an online class, even though it is not listed as an online class. My understanding is that he will teach it as an online class. You should verify that because I did not get that directly from him. I got that secondhand. So ask him what he's going to do and what his requirements are. This will be the first time we've offered that class in a long time. Since I've been here. We've offered it before, but it hasn't had enough students. So we're going to try to get enough students in it. So if you're looking for a class to take next semester, look at ITSE 2370. The title is Descriptive Analytics. For those of you who haven't had enough fun with SQL yet, in the fall semester, meaning the semester that's 1 year from now, the fall semester of 2020, after the summer break, we will offer again ITSE 2347, yes, 2347, and that is Advanced SQL Programming. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to kind of bridge into that class and show you a little something what it's about. The stuff I'm going to cover today is not considered part of ITSE 2309. 2309, well, we've wrapped that up. And now this is kind of the bridge class into the next one. So I'm going to show you a little bit about what we do in there and how SQL is used in the larger scheme of programming. First of all, SQL is supposedly a universal language of database, supposedly. Now, it isn't true. Oracle SQL has some, well, okay, it is in the sense that the English spoken in England and the English spoken in the Caribbean and the English spoken in Texas and the English spoken in Massachusetts are all supposed to be the same language. Are they? Well, personally, I have difficulty understanding someone from the Caribbean, but it is the same language. You're supposed to be able to use it. I could probably communicate if I went there. So what you'll find is that SQL, the dialects of SQL, tend to be the same. And if I were to pick up one of my queries and drop it into Oracle or MySQL, it would probably run okay, and it would probably give me output. Creating a table is the same way. I should be able to pick up any of that stuff and just carry it right over. And then some things aren't. For example, the term go, G-O, like we have here, is not consistent. The if then else is not consistent. Now, wrapped around this SQL, which is supposed to be universal and everywhere, is always another language. So within SQL Server, for example, I am now in my SQL Server, my batch interface, and I have a programming language that is wrapped around this. The truth is that in SQL, you very seldom ever print anything to the console. Very seldom ever do you print anything to the console. Your way of printing and reading from the console and printing to the console is probably a web interface. It's probably Visual Basic for SQL Server. It would be Visual Basic. For Oracle, well, Oracle has its own thing that acts like Visual Basic, and it's a way of creating little web pages that can be fairly easily interfaced with the program. So that's one of the things that we do in that advanced course. The other thing we do is we look at that language. Now, this language, a computer programming language, some people argue that SQL is not really a computer programming language. I believe it is, but it is not a fully featured language. It does not have the ability to print. It doesn't have the ability. We never declare variables. We never say if then else. Our SQL program just runs and it produces some output. That's the end of it. So it's like select from where, and it gives us some output, or maybe it gives us an error. I don't know. When we insert, it just either works or it doesn't work, and we just see it, and that's it. In reality, I pretty much have to be able to declare a variable. And in this language, so the one I'm going to use as an example today is known as, this language that I'm going to be talking about today is known as T-SQL, T-SQL, or T-SQL, or transaction. Whether you call it SQL or SQL depends on which book you're reading. There is another language called SQL, but lots of people will call SQL SQL, doesn't matter. So this language is called T-SQL. In Oracle, this language is called PL SQL. Some people say that means programming language of SQL. So it's the wrapper around it. And in these languages, now the syntax from T-SQL and PL/SQL will vary widely. But all of these languages will do the same thing. For example, I can declare a variable. So I say declare. Now, variable names in SQL Server always begin with this letter, this @ sign thing, at MySQL. So this variable, when I say declare and I say execute, that executes, it says successfully now that my CNT has come into existence. Actually, it went out as soon as it finished executing, but it comes into existence. And it's going to stay here until we either get to a go or it ends. So it exists now through the batch. So declare my count as integer. Set at my count equal to 0. I could have set it to 100 or -13. It will keep that value now until I either hit go or my program ends. I can read from the database, and this is usually how variables get set in SQL, either by an explicit command to set or they read from the database. Almost never will SQL read from the console. It can, well, no, it actually, it can't. It can't even read from the console. There's no such thing as CN or reading something from it just doesn't exist in SQL. What you would have to do, you would get it from a web page and pass it over. So you would have to create a web interface and run a window that would, and I didn't do that because it gets a little complicated, but here I'm saying select my count. So I'm saying count everything, select count from vendors. So for example, I am running this query. Here's a query that I'm going to execute. Select count everything from vendors, and this gives me, okay, it helps if I did the use. Okay, there are 122 records in vendors. Now, if I were to execute this, now I always have to go up here and execute the declare and this. If I try just to execute this by itself, what's going to happen? I say execute that and I get this error message. What happens? It says, I can't find this variable my count because I didn't execute this thing on line 9. So I have to go back up there and highlight all of this and then execute it. And now my count has that value 122 in it. Why didn't it get printed? I didn't say to print it. I'm gonna make this, I'm gonna get rid, I don't need to, I'm just demonstrating setting it to 0. And so here I'm gonna declare it, and then I'm gonna print it. Execute. There are 122 records and vendors. Very seldom will I ever do that. Most of the time, database programs like this one will take their input from the database, turn around, do some work with it, and then send the output back to the database or someplace. It usually goes back to a database. Let's declare another variable, my count 2, as integer. Let's go to my count 2, and I'm going to say select the count from invoices. Notice I'm saying count asterisk. Count asterisk is stronger than saying count invoice ID, the primary key. I just say count anything that's there. And then I can find out how many records there are in invoices. So and these variables will stay in existence as long as the program is running or until I hit go, until I execute a go. Now the program quit running as soon as it got to line 21. I said execute, I highlighted this, it got to line 21 and it quit running. So those variables have gone away now. But if I say execute, they'll come right back. Okay, now what else can I do? I have within this programming language the ability to do if then else. And we've seen if then else. We've used it for if object ID is not null, drop the table. That is very good practice to get into, so I can run my script over and over again. Okay, if my count is equal to my count 2, print there are an equal number of rows and vendors as invoices. Else, if my count is less than my count 2, print there are fewer rows and vendors than in invoices. Else, well, if they're not equal and it's not less than, it's got to be more in vendors. Okay, so and I find out that there are more in vendors, which is true, there are. Now notice about this if then else statement. We don't write the word then, T-H-E-N, in this language. Many of them you don't now. If you were to go to PL/SQL, you would write T-H-E-N, but this language does not. Oh, that's fine. It doesn't give me much trouble. In fact, you'll find that most of them really don't anymore. PL/SQL does. It makes you write T-H-E-N. If something, then, let's see. This particular language uses begin and end. Okay, but if you just have one row, one thing in there, just one statement, begin and end become optional. There are basically two ways to do an if statement. There are two syntaxes that you'll find. One of them will say if, then begin, do something, end, else, begin, do something, end. The other syntax will say if some condition. They don't say begin. It's just then do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. Maybe they have an else, maybe they don't. If they have an else, statement 10, statement 11, statement 12, statement 13, when you get to the end, they will have something at the end that says end if. This is the other one. I do not like that syntax. This one starts off if such and such, and then if it's just one statement, the begin and end is implicit. So they would have a begin at the beginning of it and an end at the end of it. But if it's one statement, you can get away without it. I like this if then else better than PL/SQL. Okay. Okay. Let's do the go. So if I'm executing down here, go, typically you begin a program with go, and then you declare your variables. So here I've declared a variable. Down here I declared another variable. Now other programming languages make you declare all of your variables in one place. Some people think that's better than to just have them popping up wherever the programmer decides to put them. This particular language, the T-SQL, will let you do it any place. Oracle's language makes you do it all in one block. So you have to write the beginning of the block, you have to start and say, these are the variables I'm going to use, and then when you start programming, you can only use those variables. You can't just declare them in the middle of the program like this. Okay, so here's go. New program, new world, new world. I'm declaring this my PK as integer, and my PK is 200. This particular one says if exists. I'm going to check check to see if something exists when I say where the vendor ID is PK. So the vendor ID, the variable is 200. And I'm going to say, hey, check this. I could have written the 200 down here, but check this variable, and does it exist in vendors? If it exists, I'm going to say it's valid. If it does not, it is invalid. So that would mean, can I use it as a foreign key? So I'm checking to see, set it to 200. I'm going to check it to see if I can use it. And it says it is invalid. I do not have one, number 200 in vendors. Let's check another one. Let's check, I don't know, 110. Do I have a 110? I believe I do. So this one should say it's valid. It's valid, so it found it. So I start with it up here, set it up here. Maybe I read it from another statement. I don't know where I got it. It's the variable is set to 110. I'm going to check to see, can I use that as a foreign key? Or perhaps I'm trying to insert it and I'm trying to see, can I insert it? I do not like any SQL statement that causes an error. I like for my code, and we're going to see this in, right away when we get to the next class. Those of you who decide to that you're want to go there, we're going to try never to see another database error because of the foreign key. We're going to try to check all that stuff before we execute it. So we'll check it. Our code is going to check to say, can I put this in to the database? I don't want to see a database error. I want to see just print, well, in this case, I'm printing it. Most of the time we won't print it. Most of the time I'm just going to set some variable to 0, a 1, a 2 that'll tell you that an error happened. I'll show you that in a minute. Let's use ScratchDB. I'm going to create a, by the way, this is this is T-SQL right here. We've seen this. We've been using this all semester. If object ID test table is not null, drop the table. We've been using it all semester. Works the same way for drop view and everything else. Drop view, drop index. It should be used. I was yelling at people for not dropping their indexes. Oh well. Then I create the table. I'm just going to create the table. I'm getting a little lazy here. Test table ID, integer, and I just put primary key out there. Yes, it works. And sometimes I get lazy and sometimes I do it. I really should have named it as a constraint. Yes, I agree. Do as I say in here, not as I do. When we get to the advanced class, I back off a lot on my requirements. For example, I demand in here that you write inner join or left outer join or right outer join. When we get to the advanced class, if you want to just say right join, okay, I know what you're saying. I let you get a little shorter with the syntax. So if you wanted to create a table and you just wanted to say primary key, oh well, that's what you want to do. Yes, it works. Here I would make you say constraint, test table, PK, primary key, test table ID. But do they always do that? No. You do it in here, but you don't have to do it elsewhere. Okay, so I've created the table. As usual, I have a go before and a go after a create. Okay. Okay. Now, up until this instant, we have been creating what we call batch files. A batch file is just a SQL file. It's SQL code or T-SQL code that it just runs, and we say execute it, and it goes executes, and it executes one line at a time until it gets finished. What I'm about to do now is I'm about to create a compiled program. Okay, this is a big step. This is probably our first step into the next class. Well, the first step in the next class would be creating variables and stuff like that. But this is the big step, because now I'm stepping out of just straight ASCII code running, just straight stuff that's simple, that runs one line at a time as text. And now I'm creating a procedure. Okay, I can also create functions, but for right now, we'll just use procedures. Procedures take parameters, okay, things that they work with. So when I call this procedure, the procedure's name is insert test. By the way, you'll see the beginning of this on line 63 here. It says create or alter procedure. This is a fairly new construct. Usually, if you have an older version of SQL Server and you try to say create or alter, it won't accept it. So what you would need to do with that, you would need to say if object ID insert test is not null, drop procedure insert test, and that'll work. Else you're going to create the procedure. But because I like it when they allow, Oracle has let us do create or alter procedure for years and years, and we finally got SQL Server to give us that. So I don't have to say it all the time. I just say create or alter. If it's there, it alters it. If it's not there, it creates it, which I wish they'd do that for the tables, but they don't. The name of this procedure is insert test. This procedure receives an integer from the user when it is called. This integer, myPK, does not exist yet. It does not come into existence until the procedure is called as. Okay, now we have a begin. So the begin here is required. If not exists, okay, so check this, select everything where the primary key is myPK. Is it there? I'm trying to see if it's already there. If it's not already there, insert the value into the table. Otherwise, do nothing. Okay. So let's go ahead. Execute. So I've created the table, I've created the procedure, and now I'm going to execute the procedure, and I'm going to give it a 1. Okay, what's it going to do? The 1 is going to come in here as my PK, and it's going to check if 1 exists. If not exists, select everything from test table where the test table ID is 1. Well, it won't exist because there's nothing in there. So it's going to insert it. So when I execute this, it told me 1 row affected. I could have turned this off. Most of the time I will, but I didn't right now. And I can go see what happened. There's 1. Let's insert a 2. I see 1, 2 in there. I could insert a 3 or a 4 or a -1. What would happen if I tried to insert 2 again? You say nothing, okay. Wouldn't that be an error? It would, because it already exists in the table. 2 is there. But what if I were trying to execute insert it already? The logic, the 2 is going to come in here. If not exists, but it does exist. What does it do? Nothing. You were correct. What will happen? Nothing. If I try to insert 2 again, nothing happened, and I still have 1 and 2 in there. I did not get an error message is the important part. It didn't happen because the logic of the procedure caught it and took it out. Questions at this point? Who all do I have here today?
So no questions from my side.
Amanda, you doing okay?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, the nice thing about procedures and parameters is I can give those to other people to use, and they cannot. I can give you the procedure, and I say, here it is. You may execute this procedure, but I don't have to let you use my tables. So I'm inserting into that tests table. What if that were something that were really, really important and I wanted to make sure that you didn't modify it accidentally? I would not let you see the table. I would only let you have the procedure that inserted into that table. And from that, when you used your when you were out on the very unforgiving and unfriendly internet, it's full of really mean people who are going to try to attack my database. Only thing I'm going to put out there is the ability to execute a procedure like this, and I'm not going to let you see my tables. I don't want that nasty old web interface to see my tables. Why? Because a web server is the most vulnerable thing on the internet. A web server is very vulnerable. Why is a web server vulnerable? A web server is like a convenience store. It's the convenience store of the internet. A convenience store can't lock its doors. Nobody could get in the store if they did. So when a web server, anytime anybody comes up to the web server and says, hi, I want to connect, they have to open the door and let them in. Okay, so they get robbed very frequently. And in the case of web servers, they're always getting knocked over. That's why they always keep them backed up. And what I want to do, I'm just going to assume that the bad guys are going to get into my web server and they're going to run barefoot through it and they're going to find everything they can find. The only thing they're going to be able to find when they get into this web server is that this has this procedure, that they're allowed to execute that procedure and put something into the database, but they cannot get to the tables. They're held back from the tables. So this essentially sets up the firewall for me. It's like a firewall. This is the interface between my database and the great unwashed world of the public out there. So all you can do is insert. You can never provoke an error. If you want to say insert a 3, that's fine. You can insert a 3. Why? Because I've decided that you may. Okay? But if you get wild and say, hey, I want to go back and insert a 1 and provoke an error. Hi there. You can say insert the 1, you're welcome to do that, but by inserting the 1, you haven't changed anything. What's up? I'm talking a little bit about T-SQL today, so this is kind of the bridge into the next class. You're hosting the next class, right? What's that? You're doing the next class. I talked about the next classes right at the beginning of the recording. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I've got a compiled program, and this is there is as big of a jump that we have just made there. So instead of just having a batch file in DOS or something that is just running, do this command, now this one, now I have a compiled procedure. Not only does this give me a lot of security, but it causes my code to execute much faster. And the procedure takes parameters. And this is what gives me the security on my database and keeping people out of it. Let's change it a little bit. And I have, I'm going to say go. Again, I'm going to say I don't, if you have an older version of SQL Server, if you are using SQL Server 2012, you will not be able to say create or alter procedure. You will, all you can say is create procedure, which means you have to drop the procedure first. Okay, well, I like this one better. Create or alter procedure. Notice that this one has two parameters. It has the same parameter. The first parameter is the same, my PK. The second parameter is a tiny int at error level, ERRLVL, I always call it, and that's one I use a lot, error level. And notice something different about that second parameter. That second parameter is an output parameter. Computer languages handle output parameters differently in one language to the next. Some of them will allow you to use them as both input and output. For example, C will allow you to use a reference parameter for input and or for output, so it can bring information in, change the information that is in there, and send those changes back to the calling routine. Other languages vary on that. Usually, when you have an output parameter, they won't let you send anything in with it. There's a reason why they don't. Lots of times they're doing it when C and Java, well, C certainly, when C sends a parameter, it passes the address of that parameter. When SQL, PL/SQL, and Oracle, for example, passes an output parameter, it copies it in, copies it out. So if it's an output parameter, it doesn't have any value when it goes in. It gets its value from the procedure and it copies it in there and sends it out instead of passing the memory address. It's just because that's how it evolved. PL/SQL evolved from the programming language called Ada. So a lot of it has to do with the evolution of how it did it. C is, I think, certainly C# is becoming the kind of the generally spoken language. I don't know C# real well. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to say I've got this output parameter, and this is typically how I handle them when I'm writing code for a web page to execute. We start off and I say begin, I want to see, am I able to put this in there? If it does not already exist, I'll check it and see if it's there. If it exists, if it does not exist, excuse me, if not exists, I could have switched them around. I insert it and I set error level to 0. This is how I'm doing it now. Sometimes what I'd like to do is right at the beginning, I say begin, I set error level to 0, and then if nothing changes it, everything's fine. But else we've got a problem. We've got an error, one error. So error level was set to 1. So that means that I can't insert that. I'm sending a signal back. So I'm pointing out that in SQL, writing SQL, you very seldom ever print to the console. Very seldom ever, and you never read from the console. SQL won't even do that. You have to read it from a web page. So when let's see, I'm going to go ahead and use my existing table. I'm not going to change it. Execute. And declare I as, now here I have to have a variable. So I've declared the variable as I. What is I? I is just a tiny int. It's just a variable. It's being sent here. It's being put in as the second variable. But the second variable, isn't that named error level? Yes, it is. But just like it works in all programming languages, the names that I use here do not have to match the names where I call it. Where I call it, I choose to call it I. And that is typical across all programming languages. If they made me make the names match, what's the point of writing a procedure? I want to be able to call it, and up here I name it foo, and I'm going to call it as fee and fi and fo and fum, and I'm going to pass these different names into it. So that's typically the way it goes. So I'm going to pass it this variable. What variable? This one. Could I have named it J or K or hi ho berry berry? Of course, I could have named it anything. Then I execute and I pass it the output. Now, most of the time, well, I don't know about most of the time, in many programming languages, when you are using an output parameter, you will have to say right there, output parameter. C does not make you do that. C doesn't try to protect you from anything. What the language is trying to do, it's trying to protect the programmer from accidentally changing something. So they're making you say, yes, I'm sober and I know what I'm doing, and this is an output parameter. So you're going to change it. If you don't put output, it doesn't change. And so I'm going to execute. Can I insert an 11 into the table? Let's find out. By the way, I have to run that declare each time. If I execute, it says mission accomplished. Hooray. But remember, I've already got a 3 in the table. What if I change that to a 3? I've got 3 in the table. That's going to fail. Execute, and it says insert failed. Now I can suppress all of this clutter down here, this bit of compilation time. Usually I don't care, because I'm usually nobody's watching that console anyway. We have been in this class because that's where our output has been coming from. But as you get further along in programming, as you get to the next class, the output is coming in and out through the parameters. So here I have one parameter that's doing input and another parameter that's catching the output and sending it back to the calling routine. What is the calling routine? The calling routine is this window. This is not executing. When this executed, it created the procedure. So when I said execute this, and I highlighted this thing, and I said, okay, execute, what did it created the procedure. Now the procedure exists. Let's see, I want to go to ScratchDB, Scratch programmability, stored procedures. There is insert test right there. Insert test is the code that created insert test is, I'm not going to leave that laying around. I don't want anybody to know how it works. Not that I care how it works, but I'm going to hide that stuff to where you can't get to it. So this is a compiled program, and you can use it if I allow you to use it. Right now you can't. But if I grant you the ability to execute my code, and I put it in a place where you can say, okay, execute S.W. Smith's code, then you can execute it, and you can pass it your own variable, and it'll come back to you, and you can tell what happened on it. So if it comes back a 1, that says you've had an error. If it comes back a 0, everything's fine. Typically, I will have, probably if I'm doing anything that's very complicated at all, if I'm inserting something into a child table, for example, so I want to insert an invoice into my database, what do I have to check? I have to check the parent. I have to make sure that the vendor ID exists in the vendors table. I have to check the invoice ID that I'm going to be using. I'll probably generate a new one. But I have to check it to see, is it already in the invoices table? If it's not, let's see, what else do I have to check? Does everything match? All my parameters and everything that I'm trying to insert, what could possibly go wrong? I have to think of everything that could go wrong. I could have an invoice total that doesn't add up to the invoice line items. So while I'm inserting into the invoices, I want to go check the invoice line items and make sure that I'm not doing something that messes that up. If so, I don't know what to do. I have to get a human being to go out there and look at it and try to fix it. But I want to avoid doing anything. So I'm avoiding, I got the insert failed. The only thing I did there when that insert failed, the only thing I did was I just set a variable to 1 instead of 0. I set it to 1, and that's what happened. It says insert failed. But I notice I didn't get a red error mark along there. If I were to make a change to it, make a change. We'll just insert. So I've changed the code a little bit. Now instead of now I just say, well, now I just say insert. Okay, so what's it going to do? It's going to take this guy and try to insert him anyway, and it's not going to check. It doesn't say if, it just says do it. So I can compile this code. Okay, now we're done with that. We're going to run that code, but what's the code going to do? No matter what I give it, it's going to insert it. So if I say insert 5, that's going to be okay. Because it's going to work. But what if I try to do that again? Boom. We hit that red, and that's what I never want to see in my database programming. I should never see that. It's okay if it fails, but it should fail gracefully. So by my changes that I made, I allowed this to get in there and try to do something that it shouldn't have done. But if I leave it, this thing protecting it, now the execution does not hit that primary key. So the idea being that this would be an error, this error would be logged. This error would be logged, and I would be counting these errors at the end of the day. I should never see those. Something is wrong if I'm seeing errors from the database. If all I'm seeing is this error level 1 come back, well, that's expected. People are going to put all kinds of garbage in there, and if I'm catching it with my procedures, everything's fine. It's when they start hitting hitting those constraints on the tables that I've got problems. So as I create these guys, I say now create my procedure, and now I give you the right, the privilege. They're called privileges in database. I don't know why they're not called rights. I give you the privilege to execute my code. Now you can execute my code, but I did not give you the privilege to see the table. You can't see the table. You can't see the data that are in the table. Now you can probably figure out what's there by what it allows you to put into it, but that's a different story. Okay. That's called database mining. But I believe that's all I've got. What have I got here? Yeah, that's what I have today. We're about at 11:54. So this is what we'll do in the next one. We have a, I have a project that I do typically. And if you take my advanced class, we don't have busy work projects. We don't have quizzes or stuff like that in there to do. And I allow you to write the code any way that you want to write it. For example, if you're doing a table join, you want to say table A, join table B, okay. If you say that in here, I'll take a couple points off, but I want to see inner join. But if you're doing an inner join, you can just say A join B, because that's the way they're frequently written. Questions? PLSQL is another example of this. I understand they are teaching a class in PLSQL. Is it next semester? Is it in the spring? Nobody told me anything about it. I usually teach that class. I guess they had a full-timer that wanted to teach it. So. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up this particular part of it here. We've talked about procedures. I'm not gonna put any procedures or anything like that. We're not gonna have an assignment on procedures. You'll see them again. They're a very important part of the programming language, but we're not gonna do them. They're not part of this class because those are not SQL. Those are the transaction SQL or the T-SQL. So they're in the wrapper that's around the SQL. SQL is just SQL, and we've covered SQL. Let's see, what's next is the final. So that is next week on Wednesday. On the final, for the final will be optional. If you are happy with your grade, and I will try to have everything done, everything you give me by Friday, if you give it to me by Friday, I will have it graded by Wednesday. I promise you that. But you have to give it to me by Friday. Otherwise, take your chances. So if you did not do well on one of the tests, then you will need to take the final. The final usually raises your grade. For those of you who are doing fine and are happy, you don't have to take the final. The final will be available on Wednesday only. Important point. 1 week from today, the final will be available only on Wednesday. I will leave it open in the evening of Wednesday, but I will not leave it open on Tuesday. So if you don't get to it on Wednesday, you won't get to it. That means that you have a shorter window. That's because we're coming to the end of everything here. And Wednesday also will be the Wednesday at 10 o'clock will be the last time to turn in any late assignments. Okay. If I have closed any off, I guess I'll reopen them, and I don't want anybody to hand me everything on the last minute. That drives me nuts. Questions? The quizzes? Yeah. Yes, do the quizzes. The quizzes are supposed to be, you're supposed to keep up with the quizzes. I didn't put a due date on them. The quizzes are they're practically free, good grief. You can take them as many times as you want. I don't, because they are graded by the system, and I don't have to fool with them, so they just have to be there for the class to be approved. And they're not a real high point, but yes, do the quizzes. They're free, practically. Other questions?
What about the resubmit? I have to, one of my assignments, I did it again. So I know that you're probably going to review that later, right?
Let's see. I had everything caught up as of Monday. Have you submitted anything since Monday?
After Monday, yes.
Oh, okay. Well, in that case, I just haven't gotten to it yet.
Okay, good.
If you have submitted it, I will get to it probably this afternoon.
Okay.
Yeah, everything that was turned in, but on Monday I graded. But if it's been since then, others. Okay, so those of you who are interested in the descriptive analytics, check with Charles Braun and find out how he's teaching the class. Like I say, my understanding is that it's going to be an online class, but check with him. Other questions?
He's also teaching the Advanced Oracle PL SQL.
Okay.
Do you recommend that as well?
Well, I check. Ask what he's doing. He's the full-time tenured professor. When I retired, I came on here as a part-time teacher. So I teach here and at other colleges. He is the one that is writing the curricula for it. I can only teach so many classes, and anyway, check with email Charles Braun and see what he's doing with that class.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I should email him so I can tell people what's going on with it. But I know that he's kind of like me. He likes to teach the class in a self-paced format, whereas I record every time. I think he teaches it more of an open, self-paced, where you do the reading and your independent study. I don't know though. I can't speak for him.
Okay, thanks.
I will attach this this file that I used today. I will attach to an announcement, and other than that, I guess we're about done. We'll be if you need to take the final, it will become available on Wednesday. I want to say about 8 a.m. I'll try to get it turned on. I'm going to end the recording now. Well, let's see. I did stop the recording for a minute. But one more thing I wanted to point out, that the descriptive analytics class, the ITSE 2370, has a prerequisite of, what was that, ITSW 1304 or something like that. Anyway, it's an ITSW, that's a software class. And we've been waiving that. We shouldn't even have it on there. I will send an email to Charles Braun and have him try to take that off. I don't know whether we can take it off now or not, that it's already in the schedule. But if you'll see the professor, he'll get you in, or you can come in and see the secretary. I believe she'll just go ahead and put you in if you have a good grade in the 2309. Okay, so we'll call that a day. Okay, ending the meeting now. Stopping.